Hello again, and welcome to video 2 of this video series I've started. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you for the response to my first video. I felt a lot of warmth and love in terms of the reception, and I'm just very grateful and appreciative for that. So thank you to everyone who watched it and took the time to, share a comment, like, or even subscribe to my channel. So I wanted to use this video to delve in a little bit into the name of my YouTube channel, because I think it's a really good way to share a little bit more about different facets of myself. So I'm just going to take each term one by one and give a little bit more background as to why I use those terms to describe myself. So the name of my YouTube channel is the Highly Sensitive, Anxious, Introverted Empath. And these are, again, all terms that really resonate with me in terms of describing, who I am as a person. Obviously not an all-inclusive list, but these are things I feel make up, a large part of what has molded me into the person that I am today. So starting with highly sensitive. So for me, this isn't so much emotional sensitivity, how some people can be like, oh, you're just being too sensitive sort of thing. Although I do experience that from time to time. For me, it's more of like sensory. So think of like the senses, smell, sound, taste, sight, etc. So for as long as I can remember, I've been pretty sensitive to various stimuli. Loud noises. I'm really sensitive to smells, like bright lights. Like for example, today I went out and it is a sunny day, but it's like super bright. To me, if I'm in around a lot of people, I can tend to feel overwhelmed. And I think that also ties into the introverted aspect, but it's more of, there is a lot of sound, close, like proximity. I'm very sensitive to touch as well. For example, I would say that I'm not probably an overly outwardly affectionate type of person. I very rarely initiate hugs. Not that I don't like to hug, but it's just not in my nature to be all touchy, like physically touchy, feely. And another way this shows up for me is in terms of how I process information too. So, I process information very linear, in a linear sort of fashion. So if I get a lot of information at once, I struggle with sort of comprehension, making sense of it. And so at times it seems to me anyways, it feels like it takes me a little bit longer than others to process information, because inside my mind, I'm organizing it in an order that makes sense to me. And although this is something that I've lived with for a while, it wasn't until recently when I started to explore, well, maybe I have like a sensory processing, dynamic at play. I was actually taking a course on designing for the future, and they were using this tool, and the tool, like, I just did not like the tool, and I really couldn't understand why I didn't like the tool. And it was one of the other attendees in the class that said, oh, this tool actually, I think it was like the ADA has given them feedback in terms of it not being accessible for all different styles of learning, because it's more of like an abstract sort of tool. And people like me who have like more of a hierarchical order processing type of learning style really struggle with that. So, where I encountered difficulties or experienced challenges with this is just, in school as well as in the workplace, a lot of times it's a one size fits all sort of teaching style or way of presenting information. And so I oftentimes would just need a little bit of extra time to process the information in a way that makes sense to me in order for me to contribute and participate. Again, this kind of overlaps with my more introverted side as well, because then I think oftentimes people view that as lacking engagement when I'm simply trying to absorb the information and it looks in a very different way than other people. So that really, I think, encapsulates the highly sensitive aspect of my YouTube channel name. The next term, anxious, I think it's kind of speaks for itself, but again, I've lived with anxiety for as long as I can remember. My earliest sort of memories of feelings of anxiousness, I think it really became pretty pronounced as I hit puberty. And at the time, I thought it was just more of like a social anxiety. I found myself very afraid to be in social settings. It made it difficult to go to school. Oftentimes I would try to get out of going to school because I would be forced into social settings or or get feedback that I wasn't talking enough. Vanessa's shy. She does really great. She's learning. She's doing great on like tests and assignments, but she just doesn't talk in class. And so that just exacerbated my feelings of anxiety. And I remember as I was becoming, when I was a teenager, this is when I think they started really doing the prescription drug commercials. And I remember seeing one around social anxiety, and it was like for this medication that was supposed to help with that. And I'm like, oh my God, that's definitely, what I have. Cause I wasn't aware of like a more generalized sort of anxiety. And I remember talking to my mom about, wanting to go to the doctor and possibly get on, this medication. Unfortunately that never happened. And so I just continued to sort of struggle with that aspect for a very long time. I remember when I was a junior in high school, I had an English teacher who on the surface seemed like maybe a gruff sort of individual. But I remember that he gave me a pass to go speak to the guidance counselor because I had missed about 30 days out of a 180-day school year. And so at the time, I was very unappreciative of that. I just thought that it wasn't necessarily his place. And, I ended up having to go to the guidance counselor, and they were asking about like how things were going at home. And I shared that, I was struggling. I didn't talk about what was going on at home because I had prior experience of doing that when I was very, very little, and that really backfired on me. So I was not going to go into, what was happening at home, but I did mention how I struggled with getting up so early to go to school, and I was tired all the time. And that's kind of sort of where it was left. I don't think there was any additional follow up. I don't think they reached out to my parents or anything. But in one way that was, the way it was handled by my teacher in terms of recognizing, oh, something's not quite right here and referring me to the guidance counselor. I feel that now I'm grateful that was done, but I do feel like they like kind of dropped the ball in terms of that ongoing follow-up support and checking in there. So fortunately, as I became adult, I took action to start to take control of my anxiety. I remember telling myself, this is no way to live your life constantly worrying. My worry is more about the future, things that could possibly happen in the future, or being ready for the future. Um, and so it got to a point when I was about 20 years old. I had been working at my job for about over a year there, and I was experiencing insomnia and just like constantly breaking down. Whereas, like, I need to go talk to somebody about this. So I was able to find a psychiatrist, and this was my first time going to see a psychiatrist. I had received mental health counseling as a child, but nothing like this. And one of the concerns that I had was being perceived as somebody who was just in there to get on, drugs, get on medication. So I was very nervous about the first visit. I go in, I explain sort of what's been going on, how I'm constantly worried, I'm in my head all the time, I can't sleep, things of that nature. And I was really puzzled when the doctor sort of suggested that maybe I have ADHD and need to be on Ritalin. And I just knew that that was not the case. I know that there's some similarities between things like anxiety and ADHD and other, intellectual learning and mental health issues. But I just knew that that wasn't at play for me. Luckily, I had the wherewithal to advocate for myself, because normally I don't, especially with authority figures or people who are expert in sort of their field. But luckily I, listened to my gut and pushed back and was like, no, I don't want to go on that medication. So this doctor suggested that I go on Wellbutrin and also gabapentin to help with sleep, because they thought maybe I had restless leg syndrome, which, again, I don't know where that came from, because I didn't have any of the symptoms. And then also at one point, I think when the gabapentin wasn't really helping, they put me on trazodone. So it was only afterward, when I started looking this person up online, that I realized that they had a niche. They wrote a book about ADHD and their whole website was about it. And I was like, well, that's kind of unfortunate, because I think they have tunnel vision when it comes to that. So I did the Wellbutrin and stuff for a couple months, and it was the worst thing I experienced. Not to badmouth Wellbutrin, it wasn't what I needed. It was very stimulating, which exacerbated my anxiety. So I began to seek out another doctor. Luckily, I found one, and he got me started on Lexapro. I was on Lunesta for a little bit for sleep. And I have to say, like, Lexapro really changed my life. It was very helpful in terms of, taking the edge off of my anxiety. It obviously didn't make it go away completely, but sort of helped me with getting the rest that I needed and calming my nerves. And so I was on that for a good deal of time and found it to be very helpful. There are other things too, other measures that I took over that time to help me with, different coping mechanisms. I became more aware of things like mindfulness and meditation and doing yoga. Also just being aware of my triggers and avoiding triggering situations. So I think one small example of this is just in terms of like the choices I make around entertainment. So, whether that be shows that I watch or movies that I choose to watch, I'm very sort of cautious with like watching things that I know are going to trigger my anxiety. These are just little ways that I can protect myself and continue to honor and listen to my body. So I could go on about anxiety all day, and I will in future videos, but I think that is a really good overview of how being anxious and having anxiety has impacted my life. So the next term in the YouTube channel name is introverted. And so I'm definitely, I would say more on it's a spectrum, more on the introverted side as opposed to extroverted. I can flex, and I did so for my entire career, where I had to play the role of somebody who is more extroverted in nature, even though even then that wasn't enough for some people. So as an introvert, in order to recharge and get energy, I like to be with myself. Being around other people, it really drains my social battery. And so I need to recover by spending time with myself. It also impacts how I process information. So studies have been done that show like people who are more introverted have longer neural pathways. So it takes them longer to access information. And so this is one reason why introverts aren't usually the first to speak up if it's like in a group setting, and among other reasons too. But again, I mentioned that like in the both school and work setting, it's like there's a bias towards the people who speak first, the most, and the loudest. And so I often got feedback like just talk, and I'm like, well, I'm still trying to access information, I'm still trying to process information, and sometimes I just don't have anything to contribute at the moment. And so it was a struggle, and I started to internalize a lot of that, which then triggered my anxiety. Like, what are people thinking of me? They think I'm shy. They think I can't talk. They think I don't know what I'm talking about, or I have nothing to contribute. And it was just a cyclical occurrence of events over and over. And it wasn't until later in my career that I was started to be like, enough is enough. I'm not going to continue to be made to feel bad about these types of things. And I started to educate the people that I worked with, especially the people I like, my bosses, that about my personality, style. And it was interesting because there's one, situation in particular. I had just started working with a new boss, and took the time to share information about how to work with introverts. And we talked about it verbally, sent links and articles, all this stuff, because again, I wanted to get ahead of this. And within the first couple weeks of reporting to this person, I had to go out to where the company was headquartered in Minnesota. And they had this business planning session that they had already planned before I joined the team and stuff, but they wanted me to come and join them, opportunity to meet my new teammates, stuff like that. And I remember during the first day, now they had been working on this project for months, and I'm just coming in and I'm still getting my bearings. And the first day, I remember my boss pulled me into a room and was like, I really need you to jump in there. Like, I really need you to just jump in there and stuff. And I'm like, oh, because in my mind, I'm like, oh gosh, like I explained to her, like, my learning style, my personality style, all of these things. And so then my anxiety kicked in. And so instead of absorbing the information I needed about the project, the background, the context, now I'm worried about what people are thinking of me, and I'm worried about what can I say to be seen as engaged and participating. And so that was very discouraging to me. I was like, oh gosh, really wrong way to start that relationship. And unfortunately it continued for the rest of the time that I was working with that individual. So being introverted, and I think there's been a lot more awareness around it, and I see a lot more people, identifying as an introvert and stuff like that. I still think we have a very long way to go. There's obviously a bias towards extroverted personality types and stuff like that. But it really was a hindrance. It has been a hindrance for me, even though it's something I'm incredibly proud of. There are things that introverts bring to the table. There are things that extroverts bring to the table, and we need all different types of styles in order to make things work. So, it's not something I'm ashamed of, even though I was in my childhood and as a young adult. Today, I'm not. People can either take it or leave it. I'm not going to change. And so I have a little bit more confidence in myself to be who I am and not try to pretend that I'm somebody that I'm not. So that brings us to the last term, which is empath. And I think people have different sort of definitions of what an empath is. For me, it's, I tend to be more empathetic and have more empathy than the average person, I think. And I am able to sense what people are feeling. And it's been a couple years now, but I saw this really thought-provoking meme on social media one time where it was like, I think, again, there's been this like resurgence of people identifying as an empath and stuff like that, where it really asked a question like, are you an empath, or did you have to be like a people pleaser as a child and therefore you learn to read people and then adjust, yourself accordingly? And I'm like, interesting. I think either way, it's the same thing. Like for me, I can certainly tell by people's facial expressions, their body language, their tone, their word choice. I can get a sense for what people are feeling, but I always make sure I keep in mind that's a theory. It's an assumption. It doesn't mean that that's true, because everybody's different in terms of how they display their emotions. Like, for me, for example, what I often says, what I heard at work, which is very flattering, was that, oh, you are so calm, you're so cool, you're collected, you project like strength, and I'm like, really? Because in my head, it certainly doesn't feel that way. I just don't show it outwardly. If you were to get a glimpse of what it's like inside Vanessa's brain, I describe it as a squirrel darting across a highway in traffic, just like kind of all over the place. So I'm mindful of that, like what I might see and perceive and what I might feel may not be accurate. So, I listen to the person and allow them to describe their feelings to me and respect and honor what they're saying. Some people have a gift where they actually like feel other people's energy. So when I left my job last year, I was lucky enough to be gifted with a session to an energy worker by a very wonderful colleague of mine who had seen this person before. And I had never done something like this. And while I'm an open-minded person, I'm also highly skeptical too. But I go in with an open mind because I'm willing to have my mind changed on these types of things. And it was truly one of the best experiences of my life. And I truly feel that this person, this energy worker that I saw, has a gift to truly feel what other people are experiencing, because she was able to pinpoint some stuff that was very present in my life, with very little background information that I've shared with her. And through doing her readings, even in a virtual environment, we did this through, I think it was Zoom. And so that really, I think, opened my mind to managing your energy in a more spiritual sort of way. Even though I had been a huge fan of like meditation and mindfulness and all of that stuff, I really haven't delved into things like chakras and things of that nature. But now I'm a believer and a huge fan of that type of stuff. So I just would say, like, very in tune to things. I feel things very, 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 very deeply, very, very, very deeply. And so I have to be careful of that, because I have a habit of taking on the feelings and causes of other people, and then depleting my energy and having nothing left for myself. So through the work I did with the energy worker, she was able to teach me ways of protecting my energy, recharging my chakras, healing, things of that nature. So I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to experience that. And then I continue to do that with my therapist. I have an amazing therapist who does holistic who uses a holistic approach to caring for her patients. I was fortunate enough to be matched up with a Black woman, which is just like incredibly uncommon because there are so few in the mental health field. But again, I kind of feel like it was a little bit of fate because all I did was go on Doctors on Demand and say I wanted to see a mental health worker, and she came up as the first option. And even though it took about, I want to say, close to 2 months to get an appointment with her, I was willing to wait. And it made a huge difference, and I'm glad that I did. When I had gone through therapy previously, I didn't realize how important that was, to talk to somebody who has similar attributes to me. I was of the mindset like, well, that really shouldn't matter. Like, but it truly, truly does. And when I was a customer service agent, I would get phone calls from our members looking for healthcare providers. And I'd always be curious, like, well, why does it matter that they're, whether it be like gender or ethnicity and stuff. And now I understand why that's hugely important. And I strongly advocate that we, as a society, prioritize mental health as a whole, but create a pool of mental health professionals from populations that have been historically left out because of bigotry, racism, sexism, ableism, and that there is some sort of program where we tap into those communities and we get them the training that they need to become these mental health professionals so that they can help and in turn help these communities. It's super important. And so right now, again, because of systemic oppression, you have the same types of people becoming, mental health providers. And they're as good of intention they are, as good-hearted as they are, it's very difficult for you to understand where somebody's coming from if you haven't lived that experience or a similar experience. There was actually a TikTok I came across this recently. I admit I have a TikTok problem. It's a really good way to just, distract yourself. And these content creators are super creative and funny and talented. But anyways, the TikTok was about a person of color talking to a white mental health professional, and this person of color is explaining like what's going on in the homeland, and the white mental health professional is just like, what, really? And while it was a tongue-in-cheek way of bringing attention to, that sort of situation, I would say it happens a lot. And this is, I think, one of the contributing factors as to why people don't continue with things like counseling and therapy, is because they don't feel validated, they don't feel heard. I recently had a terrible experience with this mental health professional I had to see in order to demonstrate to the state of New Hampshire that I am, in fact, depressed, anxious, and have chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. And this person was so condescending. I was so upset at the end of the session. I had to call my mom, I had to call my brother so that they could calm me down. She was like, I used the term ruminating to describe, she was like, describe your symptoms. I'm like, I'm ruminating thoughts. Ruminating? Where did you hear that word? It's just not a word that lay people use. And I'm like, I've had anxiety my entire life. You don't think I don't know the terminology? I also read quite a bit. I have a very robust vocabulary, but also, why are you saying that? And then they were asking me questions about like my trauma, and I'm going into deeply sensitive events of my past, and they would interrupt me and be like, well, who was involved? And just very sterile, inappropriate. That person has no business talking to vulnerable people. And so it's crucially important that we, as a world, in the country of the United States, have people in these roles that are able to be compassionate, empathetic, and relate to their patients. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but hopefully that gives a little bit more context, at least into why I named my YouTube channel what I named it, and to some of the things I'm going to talk about in the future, some future stories that I'm going to tell, experiences, and some ideas I have on, opportunities we have as a society, whether it be at the local, national, or global level, to improve things for ourselves and others. If there's anything that has resonated with you that I've talked about today, feel free to leave a comment or send me a message. If you have any questions or, topics you might like me to cover in the future, I'm completely open. I want to make sure that this is meaningful to you as a viewer, as a participant in this experience with me. So have a wonderful rest of the day. And until next time, take care.